Listen, Prototype is essentially the Venom symbiote. This washer's really loud. It's pretty much this Venom symbiote, like kind of free roam game that we all kind of wanted, but didn't know how to express it. You run around as Alex Mercer, and this is one time where, you know, an open world is fun because it's very easily transversal as this guy free runs up walls and tears through objects and does all kind of crazy shit, grabs people, consumes them by breaking them into pieces and like absorbing them, and you can become them and blend into the other crowds as them. It's like one of those, right? For the time, for me at least, it was groundbreaking in defining a fun game. So yeah, we're about to watch a video about it, asking what the hell happened to Prototype. Let's go.
This is Prototype. Oh no, hang on a second. That's actually Infamous. This is Prototype.
Oh wait, I got food for a second. I wasn't paying attention.
You think you're ready?
This shit was badass back in the day.
For this.
It's a superpower-focused action-adventure game with a unique movement system, which originally came out in 2009. And, wait, are we sure we're not still talking about Infamous? No.
But shut up, you better not. You better not diss Infamous.
That begs the question: what the hell happened to Prototype?
Infamous. Don't
Where did it
diss
go?
Prototype. My
And
bad.
is it ever coming back? Today, we're gonna do our best to answer these questions and take a look at a short-lived game series that deserves much more credit than it gets. But first,
Yeah,
make
you're
sure
right.
to
Okay,
subscribe
I was
to
just trying to make sure. I
Gaming
thought he was trying to
for more
poke. I was like,
videos, just
no, you
this
better
one.
not.
Developed by
Prototype
Radical
was the shit
Entertainment
back in the
and
day,
published by Activision. The first Prototype game follows a Venom-like protagonist named Alex Mercer as he
Yup.
maneuvers his way
Venom.
through New York City
Accurate.
in the edgiest way possible. That early 2000s grit really permeated the entire game, and it is glorious. It's also pretty funny to step back and look at how Activision basically just made the unlicensed Venom game we didn't know we needed.
That's what
At
I'm
a
saying.
time
I
when
was
Venom
just saying
wasn't
that shit
really
without
all
watching
that well
this.
represented in gaming. Really, he still isn't. And he probably won't be until Spider-Man 2 finally comes out. But
Bro,
that's
I need-
besides the point.
They need to
Before
stop
developing
using that
Prototype,
as a promotion,
Radical
'cause it's in
Entertainment was
everywhere,
mostly
bro.
known for The Simpsons, Hit and Run, Road Rage, and the early 2000s era of Crash Bandicoot. To say Prototype was a bit of a departure from those early titles feels a little tame. Designed by Eric Holmes of Earthworm Jim fame and directed by Lindsay Williamson Christie, the M-rated action-adventure's main appeal was violence.
Yes, it
Slicing,
was, and
crushing,
I'm very-
just generally murderizing
I
your way
missed
through
this shit.
hordes of enemies and helpless innocents. It was pure superpowered fantasy through and through, just like that other game that came out only a month before it. But let's be fair here. Though the premises and release dates and visuals are remarkably similar, Prototype is not a one-for-one copy of Infamous. Realistically,
copy at all.
Prototype is
Shut
actually
up.
just a spiritual successor to Radical's cult hit Incredible Hulk: Ultimate Destruction.
Yeah,
but
I
since
can see
Prototype
that.
and Infamous are so weirdly similar on the surface, it only seems fair to compare them. While the powers in Infamous are caused by a naturally occurring genetic mutation, Prototype's superpowers are the product of a human-made virus.
My name is Alex Mercer.
This intro used to
reason
like,
for
oh
all
my
this.
god.
They call me a killer.
A monster. A terrorist.
Both games
I'm all of
have
these things.
upgradable
Why did you cut it,
powers,
man? Why did he
but
cut it?
Prototypes are heavily focused on Alex Mercer's shape-shifting ability. Prototype's powers are also way more visceral, considering Infamous was shooting for a T for teen rating and had to tamp down on the gore. While both games had great movement systems, Prototypes is arguably much more dynamic.
Not
It's similar in
arguably,
style
it
to something
is.
like the
It's
early
better.
Spider-Man games.
I would
with less
never compare
website and
Infamous
more
in this game.
ground-pounding. And while Infamous is a pretty straightforward superhero origin story, Prototype deals with amnesia, a zombie outbreak, and a whole lot of military propaganda. I mean, military action, right, Activision? Right? Actually, to give Prototype its due, the military are the principal antagonists of the game and spend most of the story trying to kill Alex Mercer and cover up his involvement in the creation of a zombie virus. While not particularly fresh, it's still an interesting idea, especially for an Activision game that was made in 2009.
Back when
But they still
Activision was
make you slog
making
through
good
tank
shit,
and
you
helicopter
know?
missions, so, it's a bit of a trade-off. Unlike Infamous, there is no morality system in Prototype, but they do manage to tell a pretty morally gray tale.
The last person responsible for all of this dies tonight.
The story was written
so
by
edgy,
game
bro.
writer Dennis Detwiller and
love
comic
it.
book writer Paul Jenkins. You can definitely feel those comic influences throughout. It's about as close to a supervillain story as you can get, with Alex absorbing civilians
Literally
and
running
casually
around,
destroying the
like,
city
taking out
with a
little
straight-up
kids, look like
revenge
Justin
quest.
Bieber,
and
and
yet
becoming
the revenge
them.
quest, it feels justified when you consider all he's been through. To put it simply, Prototype stood on its own. It was a solid game. A really solid game. Even though critics called out the flat and uninteresting graphics, clunky targeting system, and dreadfully dull no powers missions, the game still boasted pretty high reviews.
I don't care. It was a
especially
good-ass
for
game.
a game dev team that had never made anything like this before. More importantly, at least for Activision executives,
I'm biased,
the
I'm sorry.
game sold
Not really.
well. Though game sales were down across the industry, Prototype topped sales charts the month that it was released, and it had sold 2 million units by the time the sequel was ready to launch. Yeah, there's a sequel.
And it fell off pretty hard from what I'm hearing because I never played the sequel. I heard they did my boy Alex dirty, and I was just like, fuck
Prototype 2
that.
came out in April of 2012, 1 year after Infamous 2, but who's counting? Just like the first game, it was developed by Radical and published by Activision, but this time, the creative heads would be switched around a little, or rather, a lot. Virtually none of the original game's creators were credited in Prototype 2.
Damn,
and that's
son.
because, well, a lot of them weren't even working at Activision during most of the sequel's development. More than likely, they were laid off in 2010, when over 200 Activision employees were let go. That included 90 employees from Radical Entertainment alone.
Jeez.
So yeah, that sucks. I guess that explains why the teams are so different. But despite what was probably a much lower morale around the office, Radical Entertainment persisted in creating a worthy sequel to the first Prototype game. In Prototype 2, players take control of James Heller, a former sergeant in the US Marines who has sworn
They
vengeance
downscaled
on Mercer
Alex's
for the
powers
death
in the
of his
second game
wife
so
and daughter.
much, which is
During
so
the
disappointing.
confrontation, Heller is infected with the same virus and gains the same powers as Mercer. It's another revenge story. But this time, Radical has positioned the previous protagonist as this game's villain. It's generally accepted among fans of the franchise that Prototype 2 has a weaker story and main character, but this premise is at least a fun idea, even if it wasn't executed as well as it could have been. Otherwise, Prototype 2 is everything you could want in a sequel. The 3 years between releases means the game looks significantly better than its predecessor. The character models are more realistic, the city is more detailed, and the effects are stunning.
But like,
Not only that,
you did
but
Alex
the
dirty,
gameplay
though.
feels
Come on, dude.
smoother. Targeting enemies is less of a hassle, and the superpowers are just as fun as they always were. The
Alex
environment
better,
is
man.
a lot more destructible in the sequel. And while the missions themselves felt a little too standard and sometimes way too easy, it was an undeniably fun romp. The critics and players agreed. The game got a similar score to the first one in most gaming publications. And while overall game sales were a little down, Prototype 2 was the top seller for the month that it came out, just as the first game had been 3 years prior. But that wasn't enough for Activision. Citing poor sales numbers, Activision would shut down Radical Entertainment less than a month after Prototype 2's release. I
Damn.
guess being the 2-time top seller during a slow period doesn't get you much in the gaming industry. The employees who didn't leave Radical before it shut down were shuffled onto other projects, and the Prototype IP was never spoken of again. That was, and still is, a really depressing fact for fans of the franchise.
Yeah, which sucks,
especially when
'cause,
the
yeah.
Infamous series would go on to get a third installment in 2014 on next-gen hardware with DLC. But we're definitely not bitter about it. It's fine. It's fine. We're definitely not bitter about it. As far as we know, Activision has no plans on returning to the franchise. And I mean, sure, aspects of Prototype do still feel like they're part of a bygone era of gaming. One where players were mostly content to run around in a city sandbox and wreck randoms on the street.
yeah,
But
fun open
if
world
GTA
shit
is
for
still
once.
popular in 2023, then Prototype can be too.
Holy Jesus, what the hell was that?
In all seriousness, the Prototype series hasn't had a chance to reach its fullest potential. The developers who poured their hearts into both games were pretty ruthlessly cast aside or forcibly absorbed by Activision, and their creations were left to fade away into obscurity.
Disappointingly.
Prototype was raw and fun, and maybe a little cringe in places, but it was great. Calls for a third game are still popping up 11 years later.
I'd play it as
And that
long as
has
they
to
do it
say
right,
something
honestly.
about the dedication of a fan base, if nothing else. One fan even tried to rally around a change.org petition earlier this year in a bid for that ever-elusive third game. Prototype has become an example of game publishers who are so afraid of taking creative risk that they'd rather put hundreds of people out of work than risk an executive's year-end bonus.
That's
It has
crazy,
become a
dog.
reminder that fans have to speak up and keep persisting if they really want to see a game made. For fans like the ones who started the Change.org petition, it's become a symbol of what could have been and what could still be. Or maybe it's a symbol of how badly we need a standalone Venom game. So, at the risk of sounding like an early 2000 edgy video game protagonist, we'll paraphrase Alex Mercer. What has Prototype become? Something less than a thriving franchise, but also something more. Thanks so much for watching the video all the way to the end. And if you liked
No
it,
problem,
let us
brother.
know by clicking the
I'm gonna be
thumbs
real
up.
with you. Like I said, open world games nowadays are just not hitting as much as they used to because they are afraid to be like Prototype. There is nothing wrong with a simplistic game, and of course, Prototype isn't a perfect game. But for the time, there's nothing wrong with a simplistic world that you can just run around and have fun in. But for some reason, companies nowadays are just like, well, I know that people like that shit, but we're not gonna do it no more. And I'm just like, why?